Rare frikicha jarre galana kamatau Atille ya kesuma ol darbu gajelteka Golab golon kanabba kesuma ndinkangahu Bude bashiran kaba kandire kesadahu Tuetan badamale kesuma ndinkangahu udu abako atau udu abako atau Dubin kunichi tuma odangu yandararu Ormi gateti soba gadamel basinyaru Biblero ron sarmene rabab dori dagabu Tankif jetti danuftu
Hello, our viewers at Gadis Rabadori, OMN, thank you so much. We have a special guest today for you. On the 9th of November 2016, the European Parliament organized a meeting on which the human rights situations in Ethiopia were discussed. Dr. Merara Gudina, among other political leaders and human rights activists, including marathoner Fayisa Lelisa, took part on that meeting. Dr. Merara was then imprisoned by the Ethiopian regime upon his arrival back home in Ethiopia, in a move that it termed as meant to quote, widen democratic space and foster national reconciliation in Ethiopia. The regime recently pledged to release political prisoners, and last week it released 115 political prisoners who were held in high security federal prison facilities. The regime also pledged to close a notorious torture chamber called Ma'aklawi in Amharic, formal name Federal Police Central Detention and Investigation Facility. Dr. Merara was among the 115 political prisoners released last week. In fact, the regime also pledged to release more political prisoners in the future. What does all this mean? What could this entail for the prospects of peaceful transition to democracy in Ethiopia? To talk about this and more, I'm joined by Honorable Ms. Anna Gomesh. Ms. Anna Gomesh, a career diplomat, ambassador, and member of the European Parliament since 2004, and a long-time advocate for human rights and democracy in Ethiopia, played a pivotal role in organizing and convening that EU meeting on which Dr. Merara took part and then imprisoned upon his return to Ethiopia. Mrs. Gomesh has relentlessly been advocating for his release since then. Thank you, Ms. Anna Gomesh, for taking time and talking to us on the OMN. We really appreciate and we are extremely delighted to have on the show.
My pleasure to be in touch with you and all the viewers, our friends in Ethiopia.
Thank you indeed. We really appreciate that. Let's start our discussion with your reflections on the release of Dr. Merara and other political prisoners in the country.
Well, I was, of course, very much relieved that finally Dr. Merara was free, because he should never have been to jail. It's one of more of these outrageous repressive moves by this regime in Ethiopia to put someone of the like Dr. Merara Gudina in jail, and especially after he came back, indeed, as you said, from this meeting at the European Parliament that I organized, indeed, with Faiza Lilesa, with Dr. Merara Gudina, with other activists, Dr. Bahano Nega, to discuss a future for peace for Ethiopia and the democracy that I know that the people of Ethiopia want to establish. And of course, that solution has to be inclusive. It has to involve all Ethiopians who really want to work for a future of peace and democracy and justice. So I was really honored that Dr. Merara Gudina came all the way to the European Parliament. I was, as always, in admiration for Dr. Merara Gudina for being so blunt, so candid about the reality in Ethiopia and about the tremendous suffering of the Oromo people in particular. I recall very well that at that time, international organizations were saying that there were about 11,000 prisoners, political prisoners in Ethiopia. This was 1 year after, since the first upraisings of the Oromos in the outskirts of Addis Ababa. It was more than 1 year after the Irech massacre. And Dr. Merera Gudina was fearless, and he said this here clearly. They're not 11,000 prisoners, they are at least 40,000 prisoners. And of course, this was a public meeting. There were people invited, other parliamentarians, other guests. I had invited also the embassy of Ethiopia. And so I thought it was really in line with the image that I keep from Dr. Merera Gudina from when I first met him in 2005. He was blunt, he was candid, he was telling the truth. And I must say at that moment as well, I had some hint that he might be in danger because, you know, I had already experienced other situations. I recall, for instance, a couple of years back in 2009 when Birtukan Mideksa was released from prison. She came also here at the European Parliament, actually to plead with us that we should be allowed to have election observation mission in 2010 elections, despite, of course, the fact that everybody thought this was going to be a totally corrupt and totally manipulated act, as since what had happened in 2005. But she came to plead with us because she thought, well, nevertheless, a European presence will contribute to some room of maneuver, to some space for opposition to voice their points and so on. Well, after that, she then went to Sweden, and then she went to jail again in Ethiopia. So I must say I could not think that this could happen to Dr. Merera Gudina. But indeed, the worst fears happened. And I can only say that I'm really happy, relieved that that is out, that he was so powerfully received by the crowds, cheering him once he came out. I think this is a fantastic display of support and of strength on the people of Ethiopia and of the Oromos in particular, after all the repression of this despicable regime that they managed to send up, that so many people, men and women and young people, wanted to greet Dr. Merera Gudina. I also would like to greet him. It's a great joy to have him out of prison and able to speak out freely, because he's a free man. He's a free man. He may live like many Ethiopians, most Ethiopians, in a country that is imprisoned by this repressive regime. But freedom is in your heart and in your mind, and he's a free man, and he dares to speak up the truth.
Freedom is in your heart and in your mind, indeed. Thank you, indeed. I see that you have been following the development since his release, that people were cheering out and coming in mass on the streets, and also in his home in Brayu. I just want you to reflect on these things more as well, because I see you are following developments very, very, very closely.
Well, I wish I would follow more closely, but yes, through the social networks, through friends from Ethiopia who send me information, a mail, I do my best to follow. And I think that is one of the difficulties, is that, I mean, it's so amazing that Ethiopia is such an important country in Africa and even globally. And yet it has so little visibility, including here in the European Parliament. I myself, I probably would know nothing about Ethiopia if I hadn't been sent there in 2005 and then understood the importance of Ethiopia and understood how this silence only helps to the oppressors of Ethiopia, this regime by TPLF, EPRDF, that has been mismanaging mismanaging the wealth, the potential of Ethiopia, and repressing barbarously the people. So I was very happy to see Dr. Merera Gudina out. It shows that indeed the regime is weak, so weak that it has to release him. It shows that the people feel confident even to go into the streets and demonstrate, cheering up for Dr. Merera. They are not afraid. But at the same time, we need to see that many other political prisoners are still in jail. Mm-hmm. I note that Dr. Merera Gudina himself called for the release of all the other political prisoners. I think this is a very important point, condition, demand by the opposition forces to indeed agree to sit and work out a solution for the freedom of Ethiopia and a democratic transition to Ethiopia. I can imagine that the regime is full of contradictions. We are fighting each other. That's the explanation for instance, I follow this recent massacre in Waldia, in Volo area. It's only a sign that there are contradictions, that there are the eyeliners who still want to go about a repressive way against the people of Ethiopia. There are those who eventually think that it's better to settle and to speak and to find a peaceful way out. In my view, indeed, we need a peaceful way out, and this must be one that includes everybody in the dialogue. Mm-hmm. But that means that the political prisoners need to get out of jail, because actually some of the most important leaders of Ethiopia, and namely young leaders, are in jail, either in jail or are in exile, or some, like Dr. Merera Gudina, just got out of jail. But without all the other people that are representative of the plurality, the diversity, including the ethnic diversity of Ethiopia, it will not be easy to find an inclusive solution. And indeed, Ethiopia needs that, because we want to stop the bloodshed. We want to stop the repression. We want to stop the waste of the tremendous resources that Ethiopia has and that is not using and that is wasting because of this, all the mismanagement, the corruption of this regime.
Thank you, Ms. Gomes. Our viewers, you are watching OMN. We're talking to Ms. Ana Gomes, a long-time advocate of democracy and human rights in Ethiopia, member of the European Parliament. Thank you for watching us, and our discussion continues. Ms. Gomes, you are making very important points, and I would like to take up some of the terms that you're using, like inclusive government in Ethiopia, you said. You also said that you even invited the Ethiopian embassy back then when you invite Dr. Merera and Dr. Birhanu in the days. I want you to reflect on these points. Many people, perhaps, particularly because the regime really has a strong propaganda machines, they think you only invite these opposition figures. I want you to take us through this process where you make it to the way organizing that meeting where Dr. Merera and other political opposition group like Dr. Birhanu make it too. So you have been trying to call everybody on board. I see, as you are telling us here, like everything should be inclusive. I want your reflection on this point before we pass on to the other points, including the Waldia massacre you're talking.
Yeah, I mean, I believe in democracy, and democracy has to be inclusive. Democracy is about solving our problems in a peaceful way via the dialogue, and therefore you don't get that in Ethiopia if you don't sit everybody at the table. That means people who represent the current government, they represent something in the country socially. I think it's wrong, by the way. Many people, because of all the suffering that in particular Oromos and Amaras, but other groups have suffered under the TPLF, EPRDF regime, will be tempted to advocate for retribution, namely against the Tigrayan people. I think we need to distinguish between the Tigrayan people and the regime, which of course is associated with the Tigrayans. Most of them are Tigrayans, but they are not the people of Tigray. Ultimately, the people of Tigray are also victims, are also an instrument of so it's important. It's very important for the credibility of a democratic solution of Ethiopia that it should be indeed inclusive, and that indeed we should even include those who are now in government. That doesn't mean that I am for forgetting and not bringing to justice those that need to be brought to justice. And I believe that many people in these repressive regimes needs to be brought to justice at some point. But that's a matter to be dealt with exactly in the context of an inclusive solution for transition and towards democracy. And there could be people and I hope there will be some people even within the repressive regime of EPRDF and TPLF with whom you can sit at the table. At least on my side, yes, I've always been willing to talk to everybody. All the meetings that I organized here in the European Parliament, inviting distinguished leaders such as Dr. Merera Gudina, Dr. Bahanu Nega, Dr. Gimo, many other people, activists. Well, I've always invited the Embassy of Ethiopia. Sometimes the embassy came, sometimes the ambassador came, then came council. Sometimes they sent a PR company that they were paying. I mean, I thought it was absolutely ridiculous that instead of sending someone from the embassy, they would send one young person from Europe.
12 hours.
Set their feet in Ethiopia. I have often asked these people, but have you ever been to Ethiopia? Did you know what you're talking about? They were hiring these young people to actually speak on behalf of the regime. It's an outrageous way to actually spend the money of all Ethiopians. Anyhow, I've always been willing to talk, and that's also why when in 2013 I went back to Ethiopia in the framework of this ACP Joint Parliamentary Assembly that took place in Ethiopia, and at that time the regime, through the Secretary of State, invited me to talk and even asked me to pass messages, for instance, to people in the diaspora, Dr. Bahanu Nega's group and so on, about coming and playing in the elections, in this case, in 2015. I did pass this message, but I also told them, look, I believe that this will require that you will be serious about indeed allowing democratic elections, and that requires release of the political prisoners, opening up of the political space so that the media and the opposition could indeed play their role in Ethiopia, which was not the case. And obviously things have only gotten worse and worse. So now that the regime is weak, so weak that it has to relieve Dr. Merera Gudina, that it has to hear the call of the people, namely of the Oromos, and that the people feel so confident that they even come out into the streets publicly cheering Dr. Merera Gudina. I think this is a time indeed to again remind that we need an inclusive solution. Those in the regime that will want to speak, they should be allowed to sit at the table, even if eventually at some point they will have to face justice for their crimes, if serious crimes were in their responsibility. Definitely, this is a murderous regime, and I believe this is important as well, because I mean I know that one of the reasons why Ethiopia doesn't have much visibility, including here in the European Parliament, despite the efforts of many people, including myself, it's because the regime wants that suppressed and has been very effective in conveying with the complicity of European governments, but also of the US administration, in passing a message that they are the guarantors of stability in Ethiopia. All the time they have used this, Ethiopia is going to go Somalia way if EPRDF and the regime is not preserved. And with that stupid argument that serves as well all those involved in what I call the development industry that just want business as usual, They fool themselves and fool the rest of the world, and they contribute to this silence over Ethiopia. They have been paying people, even here in the European Parliament. I mean, recently there was a group of friends of Ethiopia, which is chaired by Mr. Louis Michel, the former commissioner of the EU and now a member of the European Parliament, who lobbied actively for 5 months against the resolution about the prison of Dr. Merera Gudina. Every month, I and other colleagues were pushing for that resolution, which was only adopted in May. I mean, Dr. Merera Gudina was arrested in November. Since December, we started pushing for that resolution, and it was this group of friends of Ethiopia, so-called, led by Mr. Louis Michel, who actively used all sorts of excuses that they were going to seek the release, that they were going to get the release, to actually postpone action. Finally, the parliament decided to act and acted in May. But, I mean, these people are no friends of Ethiopia. They are friends of a repressive regime that has been oppressing Ethiopia and killing Ethiopians.
Thank you, Mr. Gomes. Thank you indeed. I think there are much more important points that you are raising. You said that Ethiopia, even though it has 100 million people, it's not as visible in the international arena as it's supposed to be. And this is because of the regime. What really does that mean? And particularly with the release of Dr. Merera Gudina, there were fairly good international response, including from the EU.
Yes,
what's your take on that, in a way?
I'm very pleased with that. I think this really shows that things are starting to change. Not only European Union governments and even the External Action Service, Representative Mogherini, have understood that the situation is very fragile for the government, that they are not at all living up to the rhetoric. The regime is very good at using the rhetoric of democracy building, justice, development, human rights to actually betray it. And for some time, many people wanted to believe that. Several governments, including European governments, are more responsible than ever. I have no doubt that, for instance, the British government is very much responsible for helping perpetuate this perception that this regime might have some wrongdoings, but it provides stability, it's a good interlocutor, and so on. And buying all the fake statistics that they provide, for instance, about the economy of Ethiopia and so on. I would say the British regime, the British government, the French government, the German government, some other governments, but these are, of course, very important. There's also a lot of interest in the so-called development industry that help explain that, and then they always fabricate this excuse about the stability, the security, the Horn of Africa. That regime is our ally in the fight against terrorism and so on. And they, of course, overlook the fact that this is a terrorist regime that is terrorizing the people of Ethiopia. But now this regime is weaker and weaker, and they also sense that. And that's, I think, what explains that there was this good reaction. It's also good because they understood that Dr. Merera Gudina is indeed a very respected leader in Ethiopia. He's indeed someone that the people cheer, and the fact that he was also received with his popular support only attests to that. And I think this was recognized, and that's why there is this positive reaction. Dr. Merera Gudina is clearly seen as an important interlocutor, whatever happens in Ethiopia, and therefore it's an opportunity indeed to push for this inclusive dialogue for a transition. Nothing can be done at the expense of the biggest group of ethnic group of Ethiopia, which are the Oromos. Nothing can be done without the participation of an important representative of the Oromos, as Dr. Merera Gudina, as president of the Oromo Federal Congress.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gomes. Our viewers, you are watching at OMN. We are having, we're talking to Ms. Anna Gomes. Thank you to taking and time and talking to us. I just want to ask one question, that you have been in Ethiopia in 2005 as part of the European electoral observer team, and you know the developments since then, and you have been advocating for human rights and democracy in the country. Now the regime is, as you said, is weak, that it has to admit that it holds political prisoners, even though that is not explicitly, implicitly it says that we are releasing these political prisoners. And particularly over the last 3 years, there has been very peaceful protests in the country, going on in the country, that has never been seen in Africa. Some say even that has never happened in the world. So what does that mean, that all these fighting protesters over the last many years are now seeing the regime to release, to admit they holding political prisoners and even releasing them? What does all this mean for you, Madam Gomes?
Look, I mentioned already the responsibility, the co-responsibility of Europeans in sort of giving some credibility to this regime. But of course, the US have also their fair share in that respect. But so has the African Union. I mean, I cannot forget that the African Union is based in Addis Ababa. They know better what is happening throughout Ethiopia. And they chose to turn a blind eye. To me, it was already obvious that in 2005, I remember the interaction I had with high officials from the African Union. They knew very well, some of them even called my attention to many interesting aspects of the reality in Ethiopia, but they chose silence. So there's a lot of complicity on African Union and Africans in general. But I think what really changed is the people of Ethiopia. I think the people of Ethiopia are well-behaved people. Are people who don't like confusion. They suffered already so much under the Derg. People don't want more hardship. But I think that the youth understood that if they wouldn't speak up, if they wouldn't stand up, they were going to be neglected. They were going to be suppressed. And I think that most of these protests are, of course, from the youth. It's also the result of the feeling of injustice. I mean, I know that this upraising of the Oromos around in the outskirts of Addis Ababa started as a reaction to a very outrageous attempt to dispossess them of their lands for these building plans. So people reacted when they, and I think that more and more the young people of Ethiopia understood that they have to take that in their hands. Nobody is going to replace the Ethiopian people in changing this regime, in getting rid of this regime. And that will mean sacrifice, and so many lives have already been sacrificed in these demonstrations that you just referred, in those who are paying in with their terrible conditions in prison, those who are enduring torture, and so on. So I think that is what is really changing. Also, the contradictions inside the regime. The contradictions inside the regime are very important, and there have been defections even among the Tigrayans and the TPLF, the economy, all that together helps explain what is going on. And I think this is an opportunity, indeed, not for retribution, not in particular for Ethiopians to fall into this trap, which has been the reason why this regime has survived so much. They have divided to rule. People of Ethiopia need to get together across ethnic lines. And what was really important, probably in all this process in the last years, is that we saw emerge an Oromo-Amara alliance Oromos and Amaras together instead of fighting each other, fighting for the same objective of a democracy and of freedom. I think that is really what has made a difference, and that I believe it's on that basis, with this strong Oromo-Amara alliance, building up a platform of unity with all the other ethnic groups, and indeed with an agenda for a peaceful transition for democracy, getting rid of liberating the political prisoners, giving up free space for the media, and that is the way where Ethiopia will be vocal in the eyes of the international community. Nobody can, friends like me can be and try to be of assistance, but nobody can replace the fight of the people of Ethiopia themselves.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Gomes. I think there is this point you also touched upon, that in Ethiopia, politics is essentially an identity politics. And as a result of
the
that...
The regime tried. I remember very well that Meles Zenawi, he worked for that because he knew that this was the way for him to rule and for his clique to rule.
And now this is now a problem that you already mentioned, that there is a temptation, particularly among the Ethiopian diaspora, that the sin of the regime, because the regime is essentially a Tigrayan regime, the sin of that regime is like boiling down to the ordinary Tigrayan people. And this is surely a dangerous thing that you already also implicated. Can you add more points on this point in a way and send out your message about it?
Yes, I think it's very important to indeed not go into that trap and to clearly distinguish this regime. Mostly were Tigrayans, but there were also all sorts. Look, this guy Haile Mariam is not even from a major ethnic group, is he? But he was a pawn. He was instrumental. So we should distinguish and not make the people of Tigray. The people of Tigray is part of Ethiopia. Has to be part of a democratic construction in Ethiopia. So I would warn against any attempt to retribute against the Tigrayans as a people. On the contrary, I think it's the duty of a democratic alliance to indeed put and involve Tigrayans who also want democracy and who don't want to be associated with this regime. And there are people like that. In a meeting that I organized last December here with Dr. Berhan Onega and Dr. Gimo, we had as well Mr. Solomon, a Tigrayan from Norway, exactly saying that. And he wants to participate in a construction of a democratic Ethiopia. It has to involve all, including the Tigrayans. So it would play into the hands of the regime and of badmouth and those who want to badmouth the democratic movement. They always say, "Oh, the opposition movement is fragmented." That's what they told me already in 2005. They are very disorganized, fragmented. They can't get together. They are divided by ethnic divisions, rivalries. This plays into the hand of the dictatorship. We cannot allow it anymore. So being inclusive means being inclusive as well towards the Tigrays. I'm pretty sure there are lots of Tigrayans who disassociated themselves, who will disassociate from this regime. They have to be integrated, and there cannot be retribution against the Tigrayans. Responsibilities have to be individualized. If there are people that have to go to justice, there have to be individual responsibilities of this or that other person, not the whole people of Tigray, obviously.
Thank you, Ms. Gomes. Our viewers, you are watching OMN. We are talking to Honorable Ana Gomes, a member of the European Parliament and a long-time advocate of human rights and democracy in Ethiopia. We are coming to conclude our discussion, Madam Gomes. But before that, what does all these recent developments have for the prospects of peaceful transition to democracy in Ethiopia. All the things that we talked along. What are the prospects that we could see a peaceful transition in Ethiopia? And particularly from the regime, what's expected? Because they asked you to send out a message to the opposition. Now, what's your message to the regime? Much of the Ethiopian would ask you to send a message to the regime so that we'll have a democratic and peaceful transition in that country.
Well, yes, we need to end because I see that my battery is also ending. But let me tell you, I don't know. I don't pretend to know much about Ethiopia. I keep an eye. I keep trying to be informed. I don't know. I'm not in Ethiopia. It's hard for me to judge. I get in touch with lots of people from Ethiopia, friends who tell me, give me information. My sense is that indeed we are at the end of this regime. But we need to ensure that indeed is not replaced by another dictatorship. We need to indeed ensure there is a solution that is democratic and inclusive. And that means that the opposition forces have to unite. The division has always been, as I said earlier, the way for the dictatorship to rule. So united on a basis of Ethiopians who want democracy, not because of the ethnic or the religious or other, on a platform for democracy is very important. That ought to as well include the representatives of the current regime, if they want to talk, to save their skins. Because, I mean, what I have to say to them is that, I mean, they have already done so much evil to the Ethiopia. They have lied, they have killed, they have stolen the people of Ethiopia. It's enough. They should go, or they should completely change and accept, indeed facilitate a genuine dialogue that will indeed ensure transition for democracy. I'm pretty sure there will be support in the international community, in the European Union, in the US, all over, for a genuine process of transition for democracy. And I'm pretty sure that the people of Ethiopia is prepared for that, because I could see that in 2005. I mean, it was marvelous, the way people came to vote peacefully with hopes that indeed that a transition was there. So I have no doubt that the people of Ethiopia is able to do it. They need leaders with vision, and that vision has to come from all those in Ethiopia, leaders like Dr. Merera Godina. He will play a very important role, I'm pretty sure, and namely in reaching out to other leaders who are in the diaspora. Obviously, the diaspora plays an important role, but it's the people who are inside Ethiopia who have to lead the process. And they could, I mean, they should, an inclusive conference ought to be organized. That could be a proposal by Dr. Merera or other leaders inside Ethiopia, in Ethiopia itself or outside, but why not in Ethiopia itself, with international assistance, to make sure that indeed it will be a genuine process. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to get to it, and we will dance for freedom in Moscow Square.
I see. What can the EU do, for example? Can you comment on this in facilitating that?
Don't expect the EU at this stage, with all the problems that it has, internal and external, to be the one taking initiatives. I think it's the Ethiopians who need to take initiatives. They need to get together and take initiatives and bring it to the international community and say, we want on this united, encompassing, inclusive platform to do this and this, and we need the support of the European Union, of the US, of all the governments, and the purpose is a genuine democratic transition so that the country will not fall apart and there will be no more bloodshed.
Thank you, Madam Gomes, for taking time and talking to us. Like we were talking on this show, I'm receiving questions from the viewers, one of whom actually asking about this. Maybe as a final comment you could make.
Because my battery is going off.
The EU Ethiopia readmission agreement that was, I think, made in the past. Is this a legally binding argument? Any comment you can make on that before?
It's a shame. I've been criticizing our own governments, the EU, for doing this kind of readmission agreements. In many cases, they are not even worth the paper where they are written, because obviously they are signing these agreements with governments who are makers of migrants and refugees, such as the Ethiopian government. I mean, by repressing the people, I mean, look at all these massive numbers of young people from Ethiopia, from Eritrea that we see in Calais. Why have they left their land, their villages and their cities? Because they had no conditions of dignity. They had no condition, and some of them were even fearing for their lives. These are the regimes, these dictatorships who make refugees and make migrants. For the EU to think that these regimes are going now to be partners in controlling the migration when they are indeed the ones who make migrants and refugees is pretty stupid and a waste of money. No, I mean, the best way to indeed stop migration and refugees from a country like Ethiopia or Eritrea is actually to ensure there is good governance, that there is genuine government that delivers what the people want, which is sound governance, that is justice, basic human rights, freedoms. And that's where the EU, that's why I criticize this idea of the EU that paying this regime to actually repress further the people, it's ridiculous, it's outrageous.
Thank you, Ms. Ana Gomes. Thank you for taking time and talking to us. We wrap our discussion.
My best wishes
on this. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate all the advocacy, all the support you are doing to ensure human rights and democracy in Ethiopia. Thank you again, and our viewers, thank you again for watching us, and goodbye.
Thank you. Amesignalo.
Amesignalo. Thank you.
Dhaloonni qubee kuni sodaa qawwee hin qabu ajjeeseetu dibata du'us gumaasaan nafu numa baasa gumaa keenya gara laafuun ammeenyaa diinaa nutti bitteka harreedhaaf oka hamnaan garbuu malee jetteka kan qubatti qabantu qubaa namatti qaba Ara harkaan dhaabanii booddeen shii nama guba nama haaloon baafanne nama lammiin falmanne hedduuf darraan dhabdu quba hamattu quba siin nama yaa namanaa yaa namicha firakoo yaa diimaa diinaaf dibbee tulluu sitti jigumoo lammeen si jiguu wayyaa afaan namaan dubbata akka tamboo fi gaayya guutuu sawwaalchaan qabdu badduus barbaachaan qabdu koo lammii keessi wayya anu lammii keessi wayya Nallofa jedhee yoo homafe nallolas jedhee yoo marafe dheeraftus karaa nanambe gurrafe garaan narrafiftu